My name is Danielle, and I am the Education Specialist here at the Turning Point Rape Crisis Center. Now, we are about to do something that we have never done before. We actually recorded one of our online Zoom presentations and saved it. If you wanted to see our presentation on the lasting effects of bullying and how we can be the change to fix it, then stay tuned for this presentation.
Our presentation, It Takes Unity. So it's a bystander's guide on being empowered and educated, because once we're educated about the problem, we can be the change to fix it and support survivors along the way. So here at the Turning Point, we have a 24-hour crisis hotline, 1-800-886-7273. In that crisis hotline, you can call about whether or not you believe that you were sexually assaulted, you want a SANE exam, if you're looking for crisis, how to support a friend who's been sexually assaulted, anything revolving around sexual violence. There's a trained advocate on that line who can give you information and provide you with resources. And so our next thing that we offer is counseling. So our services are 100% free, and we serve survivors of sexual violence and their friends and family members. So with counseling, to get involved with that, you would call our crisis hotline or our business line and ask to get started, and we get you in. And then we have advocacy, which is when we go into the hospital and support survivors during their SANE exam, which is the sexual assault nurse examination. So we go in and we talk to them and provide them with information about their rights, get them plugged in with resources, and just overall are providing emotional support. And then lastly, we do this education and educating the community, the public schools about these social issues so that they can create lasting change. So our mission is to highlight the impact of sexual violence on individuals and our community through education programs that foster hope, encourage change, and prevent sexual violence. The Turning Point is committed to reducing the prevalence of sexual violence in our community. We firmly believe that for this change to occur, each person has a responsibility and must do their part to prevent sexual violence. So, why bullying? If we are a rape crisis center and we're helping survivors of sexual violence, why are we talking about bullying? I'll explain it. So we provide education aimed at the prevention of bullying, sexual harassment, and sexual assault, because the root cause of these three social problems is a need for power and control. We know that students who bully are more likely to engage in harassing behaviors down the road, and that almost half of middle school students have experienced verbal sexual harassment. Half. Doesn't that blow your mind? Half of our middle schoolers are experiencing verbal sexual harassment. Our goal is to promote healthy, respectful behaviors that empower people to encourage equality in their school and community as early as possible. We promote social emotional learning concepts that help students develop empathy and learn healthy ways of expressing emotions to prevent violence. So, what is bullying? Bullying is a form of aggressive behavior that is intentional, hurtful, and repeated. So, aggressive, intentional, hurtful, and repeated. Okay? So, when we get into the types of bullying, there's three types of bullying. So, we have physical, as you can see in the picture, it's somebody putting their hands on another person. And then verbal, somebody saying something to a person, and visual, somebody cyberbullying, making comments on social media platforms and things like that. Visual is something that is a bullying concept that's pretty new, because social media, Facebook, MySpace, remember when MySpace was a thing, and Twitter, Instagram, all of these platforms, with the ability to connect, we also created an ability to have people who had negative things to say and felt more confident to say them behind a screen. But with visual and verbal, while you aren't creating physical impacts on a person, you are creating lasting psychological impacts on a person. And so with physical, visual, and verbal, what you want to remember is, for it to be bullying, it's intentional, hurtful, and repeated. So where does bullying happen? Bullying happens anywhere. It happens in schools, it happens in churches, it happens in malls, in the park. It can happen anywhere. And so when we think about this, a lot of times we think, why talk about bullying if we're not in the school? But it happens in our communities too. And so that's why it's so important to have these conversations. Do you ever lose the right to speak up? No. Whether it's about sexual assault, sexual harassment, or bullying, you never lose the right to speak up. You have a right to use your voice to invoke change, to be able to gain confidence and impact other people's lives and be able to educate others. You never lose the right to speak up, because when you speak up, you impact other people. You can do so much good with your voice and your story. So let's get into some statistics. So bullying affects 20% of high school students, and cyberbullying affects 16% of high school students. So as you can see, if 20% of high school students are affected by bullying and 16% are cyberbullying, the majority of the bullying is coming online, on our phones, on Instagram comments and DMs and Facebook messages and rude Twitter accounts and things like that is the majority of our bullying. So surveys compiled by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that's a tongue twister, this also known as the CDC, also shows that 33% of students ages 12 to 18 who reported bullying at school, and 27% of students ages 12 to 18 who reported cyberbullying indicated that they were bullied at least once or twice a month. So it's not often. It's not something like we see in movies and TV shows where every single day they're getting pushed into a locker, getting their papers knocked out of their hand. No, it happens a couple times a month, but those couple times leave lasting impacts. So middle schools reported that the highest rate of bullying was 25%, at least once a week. So when we think about this, I want you guys to think in your head while we're going through this presentation that what is something that somebody has said to you? Now, I'm not asking you to share, but all of us can think of a time that somebody said something to us all the way, at least for me, I can remember 7th grade being 13 years old and a rude person making a comment to me, and I can still remember exactly what happened and exactly the situation and exactly what was said. And so these leave lasting impacts. So bullying can be direct, face-to-face. We're going to get into the intricacies of bullying and kind of break it down a little bit further. So face-to-face, when we have these direct face-to-face bullying, when we get into verbal, that's insults, putting someone down, teasing them, harassing them. It's harassment. When we talk about bullying, we think boys will be boys, girls will be girls, but these have lasting effects. This is harassment. This isn't some little thing that it's like, oh, they'll grow out of it. No, this is lasting. So harassment. Psychological effects. So it's psychological bullying can be things like rolling eyes, dirty looks, uttering threats, extortion. These things mess with our children's psyche. And then physical, so shoving them, pushing them, hitting them, that's assault. So let's go into indirect ways, because this is a big one. Indirect ways that somebody can be bullied, because even if somebody isn't coming up to your face and saying these things, there's little things that could be happening indirectly that still impact you and are qualified as bullying. So indirect is behind someone's back, so exclusion, leaving someone out, shunning them, purposely like inviting everybody in the class to a party except for one person. That's exclusion, and that really hurts people and leaves lasting effects. That's a common thing you'll hear throughout this presentation is lasting effects. Gossip, lowering people's opinion about the victim. So this is talking to other people and being like, oh, well, I heard she did X, Y, and Z, or he likes X, Y, and Z, and talking about somebody in a way that would lower other people's view of that person and would change how they interact with that person. And then relational aggression, telling people not to be friends with the victim. I don't like her, so you don't like her either. Or I don't like him, he likes this, and I don't like this, and so we're not going to talk to him. These things, while they're indirect, impact a person and impact a child. So let's talk about the characteristics of victims. So passive, they're quiet, anxious, and insecure. They tend to normalize, and no longer are victims upon entering adulthood, though they may have continued to have lower self-esteem and be more prone to depression. And then you have proactive characteristics. So we have things that they're reactive, clumsy, impulsive, irritating, attempt to fight or answer back when attacked, but not effectively, and often hyperactive. So having difficulty concentrating or act in ways that irritate others. When we think about characteristics of a victim, these things aren't the entire scope. We're not compartmentalizing victims. We're just talking about some characteristics that can come from being a victim of bullying, or that could lead to somebody being more of a victim of bullying. But anybody can be a victim of bullying regardless of your characteristics. So, bullying is violence. Violence is any mean word, look, sign, or act that hurts a person's body, feelings, or things. So whether or not you're putting your hands on a person, that is still violence. So let's talk about this bullying circle. So the bully starts bullying the victim and takes an active part in the bullying. But then we have the follower, or the henchman, who takes active part but does not start the bullying. So they start after somebody else has already started bullying. And then we have the supporter. So they support the bullying, they think it's funny, or they give like positive reinforcement, but they don't take an active part in the bullying. And then we have a passive supporter, so also another possible bully. So likes the bullying, but does not display open support. So they could be like fueling the bully behind the scenes, but not actually doing anything whenever the action is going on. And then we have the disengaged onlooker. And then we have a possible defender. So they dislikes the bullying and then ought to help, but doesn't. He or she ought to help, but doesn't. That's an important thing that we talk about every single time you tune into these education meetings. We talk about, you should help, but you don't. And so we're trying to reverse that cycle and reverse this circle. So the defender of the victim. So this person dislikes the bullying and helps or tries to help the victim. And that's the thing that I'm calling you to do, is to help or try to help. So enabling. It's unwittingly protecting a person from the consequences of their actions out of a sense of love, compassion, fear, or survival instinct. So when we enable a bully, when we enable somebody who's sexually harassing somebody, when we enable somebody who's sexually assaulting somebody, we are saying that that behavior is okay. Whether or not this person is your friend or a family member or whatever, that behavior is still not okay. And so when we say that, or we're protecting them from consequences of their behavior, we're saying that that's okay. Entitlement. So it's a belief that it's our right to use violence or threats of violence to express feelings, meets needs, or satisfies wants. So a lot of times bullies feel entitled to act the way that they act or do what they do. And then tolerance. Tolerance occurs when violence is accepted as the norm by adults or young people who ignore, rationalize, or minimize incidents of violence. So saying things like, oh, well, boys will be boys or girls will be girls. Like I said, these have lasting effects. And if we create an atmosphere of tolerance for this kind of behavior, it's only going to increase. And so now we're going to kind of switch gears and talk about what happens when we don't. So peer mediation is not effective in situations of bullying. So bullying is not a conflict, it's an abuse. And so there is not a question of some right and some wrong on both sides. The playing field or balance of power is not level. So it would be like if you had a problem with, let's say you had a problem with one person who is of higher standing than you, and then a person who's higher than both of you guys pulls all three of you into a room, and so you're talking, but this person is still above you. And so you're not at a level where it's an equal playing field. The bully has exerted power and control over its victim. And so we need to find a way to support that victim and be able to create lasting effects to put an end to that bullying right then and there. So short-term effects of bullying for the victim. So as you can see, this is a long list, and this is a very sad list when you think about it, because there are things of social isolation, feelings of shame, sleep disturbance, changes in eating habits, low self-esteem, school avoidance, symptoms of anxiety, bedwetting, higher risk of illness, psychosomatic symptoms such as stomach aches, headaches, muscle aches, other physical complaints with no medical cause. So this is affecting their body from the stress of this bullying. Poor school performance and symptoms of depression. These are the short-term effects. Now let's get into the long-term. So long-term risks of bullying for the victim are chronic depression, increased risks of suicidal thoughts, suicide plans, and suicide attempts, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, poor general health, self-destructive behavior, including self-harm, substance abuse, and difficulty trusting reciprocal friendships and relationships. Now, when you look at the first 4 of those long-term risks, those are the same long-term risks we have for survivors of sexual violence. I want you to think about that for a second. So let's get into the effects of bullying for the bully, okay? Because we talked about what happens to a victim of bullying, but let's talk about how this affects a bully. So short term, they could also have poor school performance or miss school due to suspensions from bullying, increases this risk. And then they also have a truancy risk for not coming to school. They have difficulty maintaining social relationships and an increased risk of substance abuse. And then long-term effects for the bully is risk of spousal or child abuse, okay? And also risk of antisocial behavior, substance abuse, and less likely to be educated or employed. So these long-term risks, even just off of that first one, spousal or child abuse, that's a big thing. It went from boys will be boys or girls will be girls bullying to now a potential domestic violence or child abuse situation. So now let's get into some research. One longitudinal study, meaning it took place over a long period of time, led by a group of scientists in Norway, investigated the long-term psychological effects of adolescence. And the results of the study indicated that all groups involved in bullying during adolescence, both bullies and victims, experienced adverse mental health outcomes in adulthood. While the victims showed a high level of depressive symptoms in adulthood, both groups experienced increased risks of psychiatric hospitalization due to mental health disorders. Bullying has serious effects on both short and long-term health of children. Immediate intervention and long-term follow-up can help mediate some of these effects. It's imperative that schools, families, and communities work together to understand bullying and its consequences and find ways to decrease and hopefully eradicate bullying both in schools and communities. So it ends with you. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. That's Margaret Mead. So, do we have any questions? We can now open up the discussion part of this conversation.